So I'm going to try. So as Ryan said, so let me first say thank you, Ryan, for initiating this. I think it's a good initiative, and it's something that I've wanted to do for a while. In the sense that there are a lot of us who are in For Humanity, and some people who are sort of know about For Humanity, who are actively in this industry, in the sense that we're consultants, we're auditors, we work with clients trying to solve some of these tough problems. But there's not a lot of organization around it. You know, we're not talking to each other as much as I think we could. And so it's good to just share lessons, share perspectives, and try to organize around I think is a really important mission to ensure that AI is used responsibly. So I'm going to try not to talk very much. I'm going to give you sort of a brief description of taking the high ground. So this is the business case for AI ethics and governance, and this is just going to be a quick overview. So for those of you who don't know me, I think everybody knows me. I'm Shea Brown. I am the CEO of BABL AI, and also the sort of executive director of the Algorithmic Bias Lab. Those two things are basically the same thing. One just is for working with clients, which is BABL, and then the other one is research and education. And I'm also a professor of astrophysics at the University of Iowa. That's my day job, although I'm on a leave of absence just growing the business. Well, that's enough about me. I'm a For Humanity fellow, and I'm passionate about For Humanity, and that's probably obvious. So let me talk a little bit about what I think are the core motivations for businesses to engage with AI ethics. Because I have to say that when I first started doing this, it was like pulling teeth, talking to businesses and trying to convince them essentially that it was in their interest to engage with these topics. And that's not the case anymore. But I think it's important to understand what are the motivations, because if you're going to try to approach businesses with to provide services around responsible AI, you have to kind of understand what is in it for them. Why should they engage with you? Why should they engage with organizations like For Humanity? And this is my take on it, and I welcome in the Q&A, to give me your take as well. I think there are really in my opinion, three kind of core motivations. There's risk mitigation, there's building trust, and then there's, of course, intrinsic societal good. And I think we should not discount the last one, although the pessimists among you may. If it were only that easy to convince businesses why they should care, I could one slide and I'd be done. But we have to dig a little bit deeper. So the risk mitigation is the downside risk. So if you're going to use AI in your products and services, there are risks involved with that. We have to understand what those risks are. So at the top, I've sort of split them into two here. The top three, I think, are what I would call fundamental risks. And in fact, I think ethics and safety are really the two fundamental ones. I think privacy is sort of a subset of ethical risk. But, AI can do bad things, and that's very clear. And so there's sort of an intrinsic risk that AI is going to do something that's unethical, that's unsafe, and that could violate someone's privacy. Now, from the business end, what does that translate into? So the bottom three here are sort of derivatives, I think, of what's happening above. There's compliance risk, right? There are new regulations, there are new laws, and there are old laws which have new context in terms of AI that businesses still have to follow. And so compliance risk, when you have a really complex system, becomes difficult, like to really spot where are you going to step over the line. Liability, especially in places like the United States, liability is always going to be a problem. And so if you are having automated systems doing things that could affect people, there's always a chance that you're going to harm someone and that there's going to be a liability risk. And then reputational risk is, at this point, one of the key motivating factors for working with businesses is that reputation can get harmed. And this is a sort of a one slide to just show, I don't think I need to talk to anybody in this audience about what's happening right now in terms of bad press around AI. AI, it's obvious now that AI is propagating a lot of harm. And some of it is more perceived than real, but there is also a lot of real harm that's being dealt out by AI. And so businesses are have to face this. And a reputation is a serious asset that businesses have that they have to protect. And so this is something that they can't ignore anymore, because all it takes is one bad article. All it takes is some senatorial committee calling you in to ask questions for this to become very real. And so I think businesses are waking up to this reality that they can't ignore the fact that these risks can turn on. They can arise on a dime, basically, and before they know it, they have to answer a lot of really tough questions. And in terms of compliance risk, it's very clear now that a risk-based regulatory framework is what's going to be happening in the EU and the US. We're going to have to think about AI in terms of what level of risk does it pose. And this is something that ForHumanity is thinking a lot about. And we'll talk more about it in the Q&A about how you can leverage some of that thought leadership that ForHumanity is really trying to push in this area. But regulators care about risk, and its stakeholders care about risk, and companies and their clients care about risk. And so understanding what the risks are is going to be very, very important. And so that's very clear. So that's the risk end. Building trust is the upside, because in an AI future, a future that's run on algorithms, trust is really going to be that critical currency. And so if you think about who's going to get ahead in this inevitable future, it's the people who have earned that trust, trustworthy people and organizations. And so companies have to worry about customer trust, which means if a customer is going to trust your organization, they have to know and believe that you are protecting their rights, that's in the forefront of your mind, that their safety, their security is at the forefront of their mind, and that you have a reliable service. It's not going to harm them in the future because of some sort of lack of or breach in governance or something. Companies also have to worry about shareholder and investor trust. This is something that's becoming more and more relevant. People don't want to invest in companies if that company could end up on the New York Times or in front of some sort of regulatory committee or some investigation. And so investors are worried about this sort of thing. And so companies have to worry about this if they want to get investors to trust them. And then brand trust is sort of just a blanket term for what's going to allow companies to succeed in the future. The brand has to sort of speak trustworthiness. It has to be the first thing that comes to mind. If you're relying on AI and automated systems, you want your brand to be a trustworthy brand. And any one of these, an article written about you is going to erode that brand trust, and it's really, really hard to get it back. And so companies need to think about that. And you, as people who are going to engage with these companies, you have to have that on the tip of your tongue. You have to be able to speak that language, because they'll listen if you sort of point these things out. And of course, societal good. This is something that, in the world of maximizing shareholder value, it may seem like companies don't think about this, but that's changing. There are organizations who care about the world. Governments sort of have a mandate to care about that, nonprofits. But there are other for-profit organizations like Triple Bottom Line, B Corps, just social enterprises. BABL AI it's a C Corp, but our vision is to maximize human flourishing in the world of AI, and that's what drives all the decisions we make. And so there are a lot of companies out there that really do care about the environment, care about humans, and they want to do the right thing. They just may have a hard time knowing what the right thing is. So, okay, trustworthiness will win. Okay, so now the question is, how can you listening to this, bring value to companies? So hopefully it seems obvious that there are ways that there is value for companies to think about this. But what about you? What are you actually bringing to the table? So the first thing to kind of realize is that AI ethics is not just about ethics anymore. I mean, ethics is critical. In fact, we have a lot of ethicists working at BABL AI, and they're really core to what we do. But there are lots and lots of elements to the ecosystem of how AI is run, operated, governed that require skill sets that are not just pure ethics. And in fact, you kind of need to have ethics plus something else to bring to the table. So you might be a machine learning engineer, you might be have a legal background, even PR and marketing. And I think there is a tendency in our field for people to sort of poo-poo on this idea of ethics washing or PR as a motivating factor. However, in my personal opinion, and people can argue with me about this if you want, I think that from our experience, a lot of harm actually comes from the perception that a person has when they're using a service. So a lot of things like anxiety, fear, that kind of thing comes from how they perceive AI in general. And you can actually mitigate some harm by having the right kind of messaging. As long as you actually are trustworthy, I'm talking to the organization now. As long as you are a trustworthy organization, you are making good faith efforts to do the right thing, communicating that in the proper way, I think is actually an ethical issue. It mitigates harm in and of itself. So anyway, that's my sales pitch for including PR and marketing in this sort of group of skill sets. So, you combine ethics and you combine all of these other things, you can bring value because many organizations don't really understand the AI risk landscape. These organizations are everybody's busy in business, putting out fires. Doesn't matter the size of the organization. And so you would be surprised a lot of the things that you, as someone who's immersed in the field of AI ethics and governance and auditing, the things that you take for granted as being obvious, even like what the word bias means, or that the fact that AI can harm someone in some way, or that there's sort of fundamental rights that might be infringed upon, we take that for granted. But a lot of business people that I talk to oftentimes don't really get it. They might be engaging with me because they have shareholders or they have clients who are pressuring them to do something, but they don't actually understand what they're supposed to be doing and why it's important. And so I think that, you can bring value just by knowing this landscape, just knowing the landscape of AI risk and what's really at stake here. And so in my mind, you sort of lead with ethics, right? You are bringing to the table integrity. You're bringing, good intentions. And then so you lead with that, right? Good faith. And then what you focus on is risk, because I think what you're really bringing to the companies is the ability to identify that downside risk. More than anything else, that's the critical thing that you're bringing, the perspective to identify that risk. And then what you're winning, what they're getting in the end is in some sense mitigating that risk, but it's also building trust. And so I think that's, in my mind, and this is my own perspective, the sort of order of operations is I will engage with your company in good faith because I care about humanity. I know the landscape of AI risk, what's happening out there, what are people talking about, what are your stakeholders likely going to come at you with in terms of questions and concerns. We're going to focus on these risks and we're going to try to figure out how to mitigate them. And what you get from that is trust. As long as you're transparent about what you're doing, you really have that good faith effort, you're going to build trust. And that's sort of the combination that I personally have found works the best when I'm engaging with businesses. Now, in order to do that, you have to know everything in those bullet points. You got to know what the concerns of the field are. I don't think anybody here has much of a problem with that. You have to kind of know emerging laws. If you're going to start talking about compliance risk, you have to know what lawmakers and regulators are talking about and concerned about, what's coming down the pipeline. You got to know the emerging technology. So you have to know AI. And I think this is one of those things that I've noticed has been a competitive advantage for our company, is that when we talk to our clients, we understand AI. We're not talking about ethics or governance at an abstract level. We understand the models. We understand what's actually happening under the hood, and how some of the technical details, which seem irrelevant, can actually lead to really significant risk. And that's been something that I really have been pushing people in our company and people that I'm advising, that, understand the AI, understand the technology. It's not a small thing. It's kind of central. And then knowing the emerging best practices, right? You're likely to know more already than anybody you're talking to in an organization. Just make sure that you do and you keep up with it. And that's what ForHumanity is really good for. So ForHumanity has a lot of smart people thinking very hard about all of these issues. And I have a trust that if I am interacting with a company and they have a service that I haven't interacted with yet, right? They're in an industry I haven't worked with. They are in an area that I haven't, like a jurisdiction I haven't really thought about a lot. I know that there's somebody in ForHumanity who knows that industry and knows that jurisdiction and has already thought about those things. And so I have a lot of faith, especially as ForHumanity grows, that the fact that I have a license with ForHumanity and the fact that I have access to all of the intellectual property that ForHumanity is generating, I know that I can, with good faith, talk to an organization and say, you know what, I may not know right now what's important for you, but I know who to go ask. And I know people who've been thinking about these things really hard. And so it gives me a lot of confidence when I talk to new organizations that I'm not in it on my own. And that's a big benefit. And well, I'm going to skip that. One thing I have to say in general is if you're thinking about getting into this field and you're wondering, what can I bring, right? You might have come from a weird background or do something totally different, and your education may be in something totally different, but you're really interested in this and you're studying it. Let's say you're in ForHumanity, or you work at IEEE, or you're getting involved in the community and you're wondering, how do I bring value, right? Because I'm just somebody who's interested in this. I wouldn't underestimate rather, the power of just acting in good faith. Because a lot of times the best approach for organizations is to simply understand that they should be in the business of protecting people. Like for this particular issue, right? Maximizing shareholder value, that's their mandate. But if you're talking about mitigating the risk from AI and this community and the criticisms this community has, the best way to approach that is to just forget about anything else and just say, what is best for people? How can I do the best job possible to protect people? And just having that mindset, if you can bring that mindset and that openness, plus, the knowledge that you have already of the landscape of risk, that's actually really powerful, because that's a lot of perspective that you can bring that you may not think is valuable, but actually it turns out that's really, really powerful. This is in my experience anyway. Okay. I'm going to stop talking now. There are some key industries, and probably I can talk forever about like different places you can try to inject yourself into this field, but it's probably better just to open it up for questions, because I think I'm more likely to be of value if we just talk.
That sounds good to me. I'm happy to moderate. I'll moderate the chat. People are welcome to put questions into the chat. I can read them for you if you have connection concerns or language barriers, which are always possible. Or you can raise your hand and we'll do things the way we usually do it in ForHumanity and just call in the order that they come up on Zoom. Does anybody want to lead us out? Should we put captions on? I can put captions on. Can I? Yes. Captions are on. All right, we're going to start with Sundar. Or I think we're going to start with, there he is. There he is. Okay.
Yeah. Shea, thanks for this wonderful presentation. I have two questions to you. Question number one is that in a market like India that I'm actually working on, there is no understanding of AI ethics at this point in time. What do you actually do to create that awareness in that sense? So that is something that I would like to understand. I'm sure you would have gone through a similar phase when you started up, because the maturity would have been low even in other geographies. That's one thing that I wanted to mention. Second is in the kind of work that you do, how do you balance between technical work and also advisory work? What I'm trying to understand is how much of your efforts is in evaluation and how much of evaluation of algorithms itself or the data sets itself in the core part, and how much of it is more on the advisory, setting up the processes, setting up the guidelines in that sense.
Yeah, so both are really good questions. So I would say that, so recently it's become much, much easier to talk to people about this because it's been in the news so much. Early on, I found that you had to give examples. So, for one thing, it's hard to get conversations with people about it if they don't understand it. So everything that you can do to raise awareness just in general, right? Silly things like LinkedIn posts, or getting on Twitter and talking about things. But if you can get in front of someone, the best thing is to give an example or to ask a question that says, here's a hypothetical. Let's say a reporter called you tomorrow and said that everyone's, people in America are concerned, let's say, about responsible AI or AI bias or something like that. And we just want to know, what is your company doing about it? How is your company ensuring that they're developing AI responsibly? And then if you put it that way, if you have a hypothetical situation, it forces them to think about, what are we doing? Like, well, is it important to us? And normally, if you put it that way, even if they don't think it's important to them, it forces them to come up with some response. Somebody else thinks it's important, and they're asking you, what are you doing about it? And so even if you don't think it's important, you have to come up with some response to that. And so actually, I found that as kind of a powerful way of forcing someone to engage with the question. Now, if they don't know anything about AI ethics, let's say, part of the problem is you have to give them something to latch onto because they don't even know what you mean by how are you. And so bias is a really easy one to understand, right? I have an algorithm and it treats this group differently than that group, full stop. And because they do that, this group is going to have less opportunities, or they're going to get harmed in some way. And so just pointing out those sorts of things, even if it's not like in their particular industry relevant, they start understanding that there are issues that they have to think about. Okay, that was question number one. I don't know if that's helpful. But the second question was technical. So I have to say, in my experience, most people come to us looking for technical solutions. That is testing for bias. And it's been our policy for the past 2 years anyway, is that we won't do anything technical unless we do a risk assessment. the advisory, the sort of more ethics, socio-technical system focused work. And so we kind of, more people are interested in the technical stuff. They come to us for that. And then we say, you know what, you have to do this other stuff because we can't test for bias if we don't know what's important. And what we've found is the clients, the companies we've worked with actually appreciate a lot more the impact assessments that we've done or the governance advisory that we've done. They've seen that as a lot more impactful because the bias assessment, normally they're worried about satisfying some external pressure, a client, a regulator, somebody. But when you frame things in terms of impact and in terms of risk, and you look at it holistically, it actually gives them much more something to grab a hold of for the future, because that's what the building trust part is. And they can understand, like, you know what, we want to be that kind of organization that operates in this way, that mitigates risks that we aren't faced with right now, but we can anticipate in the future. And so I don't know if that's helpful, but technical stuff is probably more in demand, but we found that more impactful is the other kind of advisory stuff.
Awesome, Sheng. We'll go to Idan.
Hi, thanks for the presentation, for your leadership and for answering these questions. I had a question in terms of how to frame something that I saw in between some of the ethical categories you're talking about, you know, in terms of compliance and trust. There's an aspect of when I talk to people interested in entering this space and following AI governance, the word that comes to mind is conformity, which is, you know, what is everyone else doing? You know, a very cynical take on all of these questions is that people feel safe in doing what everyone else is doing. I think it's actually an important slice for where ForHumanity sits within the whole scope of things. So I was wondering if you had a better way of saying that than conformity. And second, in terms of the doing societal good part, I'm wondering how much you integrate into your messaging the notion of sustainability, that, you know, it's for the future. You know, will we still be here? Whether it's the weather or robots that kill us, but like that notion of sustainability. So anyhow, those are two kind of questions. Sorry if they're big ones, but hone in on the way you say things. I think that would be really helpful for me to understand.
Yeah, I mean, so really good point. Like, conformity is something that people are interested in, and in the sense of they want to know how are they relative to other industry leaders, let's say, or something like that. And so one of our core services, you know, we do bias assessments, we do impact or risk assessments, and then there's an AI governance gap analysis. So we call it gap analysis as you know, where are the gaps relative to sort of what we see as being best practices. But with full disclosure that best practices are a moving target this early in the game. And so that is something that we've done, and ForHumanity does help us with that, in the sense that, you know, there are a lot of people from different industries, and a lot of times we have to look at different industries, like model risk management, and is a really good one. But yeah, we call it a gap analysis, AI governance gap analysis, and it's still something that's it's a moving target. But there are, you know, I think it's for all of us here who are working with clients, it is important for us to think about what's the minimum viable product for AI governance. You know what I mean? Like, what's the minimal set of things that someone should have set up to do, like, to not be just totally negligent in what they're right. And that's only a handful of things, I think, in terms of oversight. And then ForHumanity goes way beyond that. Like, there's a lot more that could be done. But yeah, so that's one way that's the way we kind of message it. And clients are getting a lot more interested. I've definitely noticed talking to people that they want to know where they sit relative to their peers. And that's, I think that's going to be a really big emerging part of this market. And your second question, I've now forgotten. Sustainability.
Sustainability a good way to talk about societal good?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's, well, for two reasons. One is that, they already have wrapped their mind around the corporate governance as it relates to sustainability, and their sort of, their commitments to a sustainable future. More and more companies, they're further ahead on that than they are in AI ethics normally. And they already have some mechanisms for sort of assessments related to sustainability. And so that's a nice door to sort of saying, okay, this is like sustainability, your commitments to a sustainable future. And sustainability is very broad, and it includes humans. And so I think there's a network of people who are trying to join those two communities that I've noticed there's a lot more people thinking about AI ethics as being a sustainability issue, where, the AI is going to dominate. Well, it's going to dominate the energy consumption in a lot of cases in the future. And so, and then of course there's the harming people part as part of the sustainable future. So answer is yes. I think that kind of language does resonate with companies. And if you can talk to companies that already have a pretty robust sustainability effort, it's probably likely that they're going to be open to understanding AI ethics or AI governance in that context.
Just before I call on Joe, Sid, I know you had a question, but then you put your hand down. I just want to make sure, was that on purpose because it was asked, or what?
Yes, thank you. Part of my question was asked, but let me ask this question again. And thanks, Shea, for this great talk. Do you see people in the industry seeking some sort of standardization or certification or audit, or simply impact assessment followed by some sort of training?
So I think that we're in a transition point right now where, from what I can tell, most of the people that I've been talking to have been very motivated by either external regulatory pressures or reputational pressure, or clients that are asking for them to do something. And they're very different. Their motivations are requiring things like impact assessments, sort of deep understanding of what's going wrong or what could potentially go wrong. And however, as more people are engaging with this, I think there's we have seen a lot of people asking about certifications, like getting some sort of stamp of approval, which doesn't, which is distasteful in some sense, because I think that's not the goal. But there are a lot of companies who are engaging with this for the first time, who are thinking, okay, this is another kind of SOC 2 certification that we need to get as a perfunctory kind of like show that we're doing something. So the market is there for that kind of thing. It's just, where are you going to get it? And is that going to be a trustworthy place to get that kind of mark? And I think that's still, I'm hoping ForHumanity becomes that place, but I think it's still up in the air about how that's going to land and what is going to be sort of the certification for this sort of thing.
Thanks, Shea. On to Joe.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, Shea. It's a really excellent session. So I often work with kind of HR tech. So the firms I work with tend to be making, some kind of people team related tech. And usually it's for really good intentions. They want to help people develop their skills, or they want to stop the kind of attrition, or, some very kind of grand goal to make things better for people. So when you ask them questions like, how are you mitigating bias in it? They're usually a bit confused because they think that that's what their tech is intended to do already. And quite often you get really daft answers like, oh, well, we didn't put any in, we're trying to mitigate that. That's just what we're trying to do. Or our developers are really clever. They didn't do that. Look, they went to Google first. Do you come across that? And if you do, how do you kind of progress the conversation from there? Once you've kind of hit that kind of blank on the AI ethics front, where they've just not really even got the fundamental understanding of, what could happen with their tech that they have here.
Yeah, I mean, I do run across that a lot. I mean, it requires education, but it has to happen kind of on the spot. Like it has to be education as you're conversing with the people. And, I typically have some sort of subset of examples that I might use. So obviously, I mean, the thing I hear a lot is we don't put any protected categories we don't use any protected categories in our algorithms, and therefore they're not going to be biased, right? That's the most common one. And then you point out proxy variables and how that could happen. And then they say, oh, we know we didn't put any zip code in there, right? And typically the understanding of proxy variables will end at things like really obvious things. And so, this is where having as many use case examples, so you can talk about the Amazon's hiring algorithm and how it started picking up things, silly things like what college, what was all female colleges, and it started, downgrading CVs that had that kind of thing that would not be obvious. And then I also focus a lot on the filter effects, because I think people forget that if you take a process that was, let's say, once done by a human, or some decision that was made by a human, and as soon as you automate that process, you essentially, the compression of all of these variables, you're filtering out a lot of information. And by default, that's going to cause some kind of bias. You don't understand necessarily what it's going to be initially. And it's also, you're filtering out people who don't conform with whatever system you've set up. That you're just excluding them. And then people who might conform, but the information about them has to be modified in some way to fit into that filters and that distorts reality. And those effects are sort of poorly understood unless you do a real careful assessment. And so I kind of lean on those two examples to really illustrate that it's not so straightforward. Even if you think you've covered it, it's likely that you need somebody who's thought about this a lot to carefully look through your system and understand what the real potential impacts are.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Lucas.
Yes, thank you very much. I thought it was very interesting and clear. And as you have listed the kind of argument which you could bring forward to business leaders, I just wonder if the argument motivated staff would also be valid, so that you could explain for a business leader, if people are working on products which they believe in, they are more motivated than, well, they think they are somehow problematic or risky, the products. Is this a valid argument, Shea?
Oh, I mean, it's absolutely a valid argument. It's one of those things that you think that is important, but the question is what's going to motivate that person, right? And so for me, like, I've noticed that's a piece of industry leadership. So a lot of times if you're talking like to a CEO of a company or somebody who's really high up in the C-suite, the motivating thing is you want to be a leader in this field, right? You want to be seen as an organization that is at the forefront of responsible AI, let's say. A piece of that is I think that your employees are going to want to have, I mean, that's something that leaders understand in general, that you have to have a shared vision in order to get a really good productivity and get people behind that mission. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it depends on, you got to feel it out when you're talking to somebody. And if you see that they really care about that, or if for instance, because I always research, I'm sure we all do, you research the people ahead of time. You see LinkedIn that it's important, you know, we have this mission, this is our mission. If they're very mission focused, and then you say, you know what, this could be part of your mission, that you are going to, you know, be a leader in responsible AI. You're going to further this industry, and that could be part of your mission, which is going to get all your employees on board. So absolutely, I think it's valid. It's one of those things you got to pick what's going to be most motivating for that person that you're talking to.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to use a little bit of moderator's privilege here. I'm going to ask the three fellows to hold their question. I'm going to go with Christine and then Maud. So Christine first, please.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for the great presentation. So my question is I think very general, relate to some of the technology right now mashed together for this kind of metaverse or the Web3 development. Like, where do you start this AI ethic conversation with developers when they are looking at using AI or machine learning or, you know, the latest and greatest technology for some technology greenfield such as metaverse? There's no baseline of measurement as per risks, right? So like, where do you kind of translate these AI risks or ethical concerns to developers or engineers are looking into this kind of latest and greatest technology out there?
Yeah. So I'll be totally honest that I don't have a different approach per se for that. So I think it's obvious that any new technology, right, and things like the metaverse, or new, and the metaverse is in particular is it's not a hard sell that there's potential risk, right? And I feel like, because there's a whole social aspect to it, right? It's not just a purely business or technical thing. And people are really savvy now to the effects of social networks and potential negative effects. And using AI, you know, AI is going to moderate the experience you have in the metaverse, right? And the simple things from like bias, like it doesn't do so well. It can't track my eyes as well because I belong to a particular group. And therefore, when I try to hang out with my friends in the metaverse, I'm going to look like I'm looking over their shoulder all the time. You know, silly things like that, which is not silly in the moment, of course, to more fundamental things like how are you moderating people's experience and governing that. You know, there's all sorts of issues. But if you're talking to developers, I feel like it's the same task as ordinary developers of AI, is to understand that the choices that you make have an actual impact on people's experience, and that the choices you make have ethical or normative repercussions. And so you have to be aware of that. And it's not just you, it's not your fault. It has to be a whole community of the development team and the governance. Everybody's responsible. But just it's the same task, is to get those people to understand that their choices have normative repercussions. And then you can have the open conversation. So that's not a very satisfying answer probably, but I haven't approached it differently.
Yeah, but great. Thank you very much.
Maud?
I have two quick questions. Well, about in my field in children's rights, I would say predictive analysis has been used for some time in social welfare mainly, but there it's still difficult to convince that it's not really the right thing. And I saw you shared something on LinkedIn about Allegheny County in the US and this auditing, and I think it's still used in best practices by AI policies. So I was wondering. I think in children's rights field, there's still a lot of work to do. And then my second comment was, I think it's very interesting that you have all those people that you think about all those professionals in your field, because when I have, for example, people talking in children's rights about chatbots or conversational AI, and then developers talking about natural language interfaces, you have to have those people communicate really, and it's not always easy. So it's really interesting that you do that in your work. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's so I'll address the last thing first. I think that the key to this particular industry, like if you're going to bring value to whatever organization, it could be government, it could be companies, the main value that a person brings when they're thinking about AI ethics or governance or risk is that interdisciplinary perspective. And so I see the people that are the best at it are the ones who can build bridges between the technical people and the decision makers and stakeholders, and stakeholder engagement. Like I think that there will be whole industry with just focused on engaging with stakeholders around AI. Like I think it's one of the key things that's most difficult for us as an organization doing risk assessment is like we have to literally go out and find people who could potentially either are or have been or could potentially be impacted and from different backgrounds. And that's not an easy thing to do. And so people, the ability to engage with all the stakeholders on their level is something that's super valuable. And so that I just want to say that's a very, very valuable thing. And it doesn't matter what discipline you come from. If you have that ability, that's unique and that's really valuable. Now, for the children's welfare, I mean, I think, and social services in general, but one of the key things that we focus on if we do a risk assessment, and we recommend anybody does, is to focus on or to think who are the most vulnerable stakeholders in this socio-technical system. Because vulnerable stakeholders are likely, the people with the least power are the ones most likely to be harmed. That's kind of like a rule of thumb, right, in life. And so in this case, you're talking about typically children are have very little power, right, over their lives, over anything. So they're automatically a high risk category. And so that's something that's like priority number one with a risk assessment. And I think it's just a matter, and I think everybody who works in social welfare is convinced of that. And all you have to do is convince them that algorithmic solutions are not necessarily the best answer to addressing that, right? They come with their own risks because typically the parents of these children are also highly vulnerable. And so it's just a matter, I default to a risk mindset, and that risk mindset defaults to the most vulnerable populations. And so in my mind, I would automatically think in that situation, how can these people get harmed? And it's just a matter of thinking through the algorithmic ways in which that happens. And it's pretty straightforward. It's just, convincing people that algorithms can do harm and more harm than good in a lot of cases. That's just a matter of coming up with the evidence for that. And I think there is a lot of evidence out there. So I don't know if I probably went off the rails with that answer, but the good questions though.
Thanks, Shea. And of course, there is a children's code certification scheme available as well.
Thank you, Ryan.
Always trying to advance the ForHumanity cause. So,
yep.
All right, Vibhav, I want to be mindful of time, so I'm going to ask. I want to try to get to these three questions, but you got to be bullet pointy. So, because I want to finish off with a small preview for 2 weeks from today when Chris is going to talk. So, Vibhav, be real quick if you can.
Absolutely. My question is very simple. Picking up from Sundar's point, if in the legal space, law catches up to technology, like law catching up to technology is slower. So when you're in legal practice, from your perspective, where do legal practitioners fit in the current scheme from what you are doing in the AI field?
Yeah. that answer is simple and very bullet pointy as well. Attorneys or legal professionals are maybe first and foremost skilled at risk management for their clients. I mean, you need to know the law, and most of the risks that you're mitigating are legal risks. However, I think most attorneys or lawyers that I work with or have talked to, their primary mindset is one of risk management. And so I think that they are just use your natural skill set in the context of best practices and all of these other risks that are law adjacent or soft law. You know what I mean? And I think lawyers are actually really well equipped for this job. Period. And it's an easy sell.
Michael.
Thank you.
Yeah, so Shea, this is more of a thought. Really want to thank you for kind of revealing a little bit of the BABL secret sauce. And I say that so much in that that this community here, we like when BABL and Shea's organization, does well with ForHumanity, it's good for all of us. And so I want to kind of plant a seed with everyone as we begin to build and flex and leverage out. If you do come across the best practice, feel free, let's look for ways to leverage that amongst each other. It's really one of those. Shea began it. The original fellow, the OG fellow, setting the example, and I really appreciate it. Chris is doing it a little bit next, but it's one of those things by which the success of some of others will actually enable others to be successful. And I appreciate Shea taking the leadership, and Ryan as well. Thank you so much.
Marcus, last thought.
Last thought question for Shea. First of all, thank you. When I used to work with Bloomberg, I didn't know much about tech, but I used to use these Bloomberg cheat sheets. So I'm looking for some similar ForHumanity cheat sheets in terms of what are the top 30 AI algorithms, when are they being used, when shouldn't they be used, because that helps putting the criteria into perspective. And the same thing for risk. I know we got the risk body of knowledge, which is huge. I'm looking for a condensed version, 1 page or 2 page, so that I can have here when I speak to a prospective client and say, what about this? What about that? What about this algorithm? And so on. Is there something like that? And if not, could we please get together and do something like it? Because I think that would help immensely. Thank you.
Yeah, so I mean, I have a cheat sheet, and I definitely have a cheat sheet, and I update it before I talk to people, and so yeah, it exists, and it's it's something that maybe I'd be willing to share, and so I have to think about that, but it is a powerful thing to be able to have these things at your fingertips when you're talking to people, because it's important to have answers. And when people ask, why do I care? You got to have answers for that. And that's part of what the gist of my talk was, is that we can't just say it's the right thing to do. We also have to say, why does it matter to you? And that is something that you need a kind of a cheat sheet for. You need to be able to quickly come up with examples.
Cheat sheet's a list of examples.
It's basically a list of examples. What has happened in this industry? What laws are relevant to you? I'm going to show you that you didn't even know you were going to come under this regulation, and or I'm going to show you this example that you never saw or thought of, and then I'm going to come up with a hypothetical for everybody. When I talk to people, I'll come up with a hypothetical that is going to put them on their toes about what they're doing. Because that's what you need to motivate people. You gotta have those things that get them a little bit uneasy. That, oh, wait a second, maybe I didn't have it all under control, and because most of the time they don't, and so you just have to expose that essentially.
All right. So on that note, I wanted to say thank you to Shea for sharing his wisdom and even sort of suggesting the idea. He's been after me for some time to get this going, and it's time, and now we're off and running. To that point, for those of you, I heard that some of you got connections or said, you should go check this out. This is an event that ForHumanity will host every second Wednesday. So we already have the next one planned. Chris Leong, based in the UK, Leong Solutions, will pick the ball up from Shea. and talk about crossing the chasm, trying to get through these objections, right? Trying to get through this challenge of getting people to pay attention to these legitimate risks. And so Chris will do the same thing. It will be the same sort of format. What I will do right now fast is I will drop in the invitation. You can register for this in case so you got the connection a different way. There is the registration. You're welcome to share it too. The more the merrier. I can host 1,000 people in this Zoom call if we need to, and that would be a great problem to have. So I would love to have it. I look forward to seeing you in 2 Wednesdays. So that's May the 25th. It'll be the same time, 1 p.m. Eastern time. So it's lunch here and it's dinner across the pond. And either way, have a meal and come listen to some smart people help share their experiences with you. Thanks again to Shea. Thanks for the great questions. And we'll see everyone again in 2 weeks. Cheers.